In 793 AD, a group of monks on the island of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England woke up to a normal morning. They prayed, they tended their gardens. They had absolutely no reason to believe that anything was about to change. Lindisfarne was one of the holiest sites in all of Christendom, home to priceless manuscripts and silver relics accumulated over generations. It sat on a small tidal island surrounded by the cold grey waters of the North Sea, and that was supposed to be its protection. Water on every side. No army could march there without being seen for miles. But on that June morning, ships appeared on the horizon. Long, narrow vessels with square sails cutting through the waves at speeds the monks had never seen before. These ships did not need a harbour. They did not need a dock. They rode straight onto the beach, their shallow hulls scraping against the sand, and dozens of armed Norse warriors poured out before anyone could even ring an alarm bell. The raid on Lindisfarne was over almost as quickly as it began. The Vikings grabbed everything valuable they could carry, killed those who resisted, and dragged others away as captives. Then they climbed back into their ships, pushed off from the shore, and vanished back across the open water. By the time word reached the nearest Anglo-Saxon garrison, the raiders were gone. Completely, totally gone. And that was the part that terrified everyone, not just the violence, the speed. The fact that armed men could materialize from the ocean, strike a target miles from any major settlement, and disappear before a single soldier could respond. How do you fight an enemy you cannot catch? That question haunted every kingdom in Europe for the next 250 years. And the answer, it turned out, was that you could not. At least not until you understood the one thing that made the Vikings nearly impossible to stop: their ships. To understand what made Viking longships so fast, you have to understand how they were built. And the construction method the Norse shipwrights developed was unlike anything else in the medieval world. It was called clinker construction. The technique involved splitting oak logs into long, thin planks and then layering those planks along the hull so that each one overlapped the plank below it. The overlapping edges were fastened together with iron rivets spaced roughly 15 to 20 centimeters apart. This created a stepped pattern running from the keel all the way up to the gunwale on both sides of the ship. Now, most shipbuilders in Europe at this time used a completely different approach. They built heavy, rigid frames first, and then attached thick planks flush against each other to form the hull. The result was a strong vessel, sure, but also a heavy one. Those ships sat deep in the water, moved slowly, and cracked under stress in rough seas because the hull had no give to it. The Viking method was the opposite philosophy entirely. By overlapping the planks and securing them with rivets that allowed slight movement at the joints, the clinker hull could actually flex. The ship would twist and bend with the motion of the waves rather than fighting against them. Think about it this way. Imagine holding a rigid board flat and pushing it through choppy water. It slams against every wave, absorbs the full impact, and eventually something breaks. Now imagine holding a long strip of leather or a flexible branch and doing the same thing. It bends, it gives, it moves with the energy of the water instead of absorbing it. That is what a Viking longship did. The hull was alive in the water, and the planks below the waterline on a vessel like the Gokstad ship were only 2 to 3 centimeters thick. That is barely thicker than your thumb. This sounds fragile, but the overlapping construction distributed stress across the entire hull rather than concentrating it at any single point. The result was a ship that was both remarkably light and remarkably strong at the same time. This lightweight flexibility gave Viking ships their defining advantage over every other vessel in European waters. Speed. A clinker-built longship could reach 10 to 12 knots under normal sailing conditions. Some accounts suggest that the fastest warships hit 15 knots or even higher with favorable wind. Compare that to the typical Frankish or Anglo-Saxon trading vessel, which topped out at 5 to 7 knots. On a good day, the Vikings were not just a little faster. They were roughly twice as fast as anything trying to chase them. There is an account from the biographer Notker the Stammerer, who wrote about the life of Charlemagne. In the story, a fleet of Norse raiders appeared along the southern coast of France. When they spotted a Frankish garrison positioned at their intended target, they turned and fled. Charlemagne ordered his own fleet to pursue them. The Frankish ships could not keep up. The Vikings pulled away and disappeared. Charlemagne, who was already elderly by this point, reportedly stood watching and said something to the effect of, "I do not fear what these bandits will do to me, but I am sick at heart thinking about the harm they will do to my descendants." Even the most powerful ruler in Western Europe recognized that he had no answer for these ships. But speed was only one piece of the puzzle. The second feature that made Viking ships nearly uncatchable was their shallow draft. The draft of a ship is the distance between the waterline and the lowest point of the hull beneath the surface. Most European warships and cargo vessels of this era had deep drafts. They needed several meters of water beneath them to stay afloat, which meant they were restricted to deep harbors, established ports, and major river channels. Viking longships needed less than 1 meter of water. Some could operate in as little as half a meter. That meant they could go places no other ship could follow. They could sail directly up shallow rivers, navigating waterways that European defenders assumed were impassable by any military vessel. They could ride right up onto sandy beaches, mudflats, and riverbanks, with the crew jumping out into knee-deep water and immediately forming a raiding party. This shallow draft is what turned the entire coastline of Europe and every navigable river into a potential attack zone. The Seine, the Thames, the Rhine, the Loire, the Elbe, the Weser. Vikings sailed up all of them. They raided Paris by sailing directly up the Seine multiple times during the 9th century. They struck monasteries and towns along the Loire. They penetrated deep into the English interior via the Thames and its tributaries. Settlements that were built dozens of miles inland, settlements that had never worried about seaborne attack because they were nowhere near the coast, suddenly found armed Norse warriors at their gates, and the defenders had no way to give chase. Their own ships could not follow up those shallow rivers. Their cavalry could not keep pace along the banks. By the time a local lord assembled his men and marched to the site of the raid, the Viking ships were already gone, gliding back downstream toward the open sea. If you are enjoying this video and learning something new, take a second and hit subscribe. We cover deep dives like this every week. Now, the shallow draft and raw speed were devastating enough on their own, but there was another design feature that made Viking longships almost supernatural in their ability to escape: the symmetrical hull. Most ships in this era had a clearly defined bow and stern. The front of the ship was shaped differently from the back, which meant that if you needed to reverse course, you had to physically turn the entire vessel around. In tight river channels, in shallow coastal waters, or in the middle of a raid gone wrong, that turning process cost precious minutes. Minutes that could mean the difference between escaping and getting trapped. Viking longships were built with nearly identical bow and stern profiles. The ship looked almost the same from the front as it did from the back. This meant that in an emergency, the crew did not have to turn the ship around at all. They could simply start rowing in the opposite direction and the ship would move just as efficiently in reverse. They could approach a target, land on the beach, load their plunder, and pull straight back out the way they came, without any maneuvering. For coastal defenders trying to corner these raiders against a shoreline or trap them in a river bend, this symmetrical design was maddening. Every trap had a built-in escape route. The propulsion system added yet another layer of tactical flexibility. Viking longships carried a large square sail, typically woven from wool and sometimes reinforced with leather strips, which powered the ship across open water. Under full sail with good wind, a longship could cover enormous distances. Vikings sailed from Scandinavia to Iceland, from Iceland to Greenland, and from Greenland all the way to the coast of North America, which they called Vinland. They sailed east into the rivers of what is now Russia, all the way down to the Black Sea and the gates of Constantinople. The range of these ships was staggering for the era, but when the wind died, or when they entered narrow rivers and coastal channels where a sail was useless, every crew member became a rower. The Gokstad ship, which was built around 890 AD and excavated from a burial mound in Norway in 1880, had 32 oar positions. With 2 men per oar, a helmsman, and a lookout, the crew could number up to 67. Rowers worked in shifts during long voyages, which meant the ship could maintain speed over extended distances without exhausting the crew, and the transition between sail and oar power was seamless. The crew could drop the sail, grab their oars, and keep moving without any pause. This dual propulsion system meant there was literally no situation where a Viking longship was helpless. Calm seas, strong winds, narrow rivers, open ocean. They could keep moving through all of it. European warships of the same era were almost entirely dependent on wind power alone, which meant calm weather could strand an entire fleet while Viking raiders rode right past them. There was also a tactic that rarely shows up in the history books, but that gave Vikings access to places that should have been completely unreachable: the portage. Viking longships were light enough that crews could pull them out of the water and carry them overland to reach a completely different river system. They would sail up one river as far as they could go, haul the ship across a stretch of land, and launch it into a river flowing in a different direction entirely. This is how Norse raiders and traders navigated deep into Eastern Europe, using the rivers of modern-day Russia and Ukraine to reach the Caspian Sea and the Byzantine Empire. They connected waterways that nobody else had ever connected, because nobody else had ships light enough to carry between them. This was not just a military tactic, it was a strategic revolution. It meant that Viking raiders could appear on rivers that had no connection to the sea, in regions that had no reason to expect a seaborne attack. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Imagine being a farmer or a merchant in a river town hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. You have never seen an ocean in your life. And then one morning, a fleet of dragon-proud warships comes gliding around the river bend, packed with armed warriors. Where did they come from? How is this possible? That terror, that sense of an enemy that could appear anywhere, was a weapon in itself. The archaeological evidence backs all of this up. The Gokstad ship, discovered in southern Norway, is one of the best preserved Viking vessels ever found. It is 23.22 meters long and 5.18 meters wide, built entirely from oak using clinker construction with 16 rows of overlapping planks. When it was excavated, 32 painted shields were found attached to each side, alternating yellow and black. The ship had been buried inside a massive mound of turf and clay as part of a funeral for what archaeologists believe was a wealthy chieftain. His skeleton was found inside a wooden burial chamber on the ship itself, surrounded by the bones of horses, dogs, and even a peacock. But the Gokstad ship is just one example. In 1962, archaeologists excavated 5 deliberately sunken ships from the Roskilde Fjord in Denmark. Known as the Skuldelev ships, these vessels had been intentionally sunk in the 11th century to create a blockade defending the approach to Roskilde, which was then the capital of Denmark. 2 of the 5 were warships. The largest, designated Skuldelev II, was originally about 30 meters long, had space for 30 rowing benches, and could carry a crew of 65 to 70 men. Dendrochronology, which is the science of dating wood by analyzing its tree ring patterns, showed that Skuldelev II was built in Dublin around the year 1042. That last detail is worth pausing on. A Viking warship built in Dublin, Ireland, not in Scandinavia. This tells us that Viking shipbuilding technology had spread across their entire network of settlements and trading posts. They were not building all their ships in one place and sailing them out. They were building them wherever they were, using the same clinker construction techniques passed down through generations of master shipwrights. The knowledge itself was the weapon. Modern reconstructions of these ships have confirmed what the historical records describe. A full-size replica of Skuldelev II, called the Sea Stallion from Glendalough, was built at the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde and sailed from Denmark to Dublin in 2007, retracing the original voyage. The ship performed exactly as the ancient sources suggested: fast, agile, capable of handling open ocean swells and shallow coastal waters alike. The crew reported that the hull visibly flexed in heavy seas, bending and twisting with the waves in a way that felt almost organic. So why did it take so long for the rest of Europe to develop an answer? The main reason is that the problem was not just military, it was architectural. You cannot build a faster ship to catch a Viking longship if your entire shipbuilding tradition is based on heavy, rigid hull construction. You would have to reinvent your approach from scratch. And that takes generations. Alfred the Great, King of Wessex in the late 9th century, was one of the first European rulers to seriously attempt a naval counter-strategy. He ordered the construction of a new fleet of ships specifically designed to be faster and larger than the Viking longships. But simply building ships was not enough. Alfred also constructed a network of fortified towns called burhs, positioned so that no settlement in his kingdom was more than a day's march from a defended position. This combined naval and land defense strategy was the first approach that actually slowed the Viking raids in England. But it took decades to build, and it only worked because Alfred understood from bitter personal experience that you could not fight the longship on the water. You had to make the land targets too hard to hit. Other kingdoms were not as strategic. The Frankish Empire struggled for nearly a century to deal with Viking raids along its rivers. The fortifications that were supposed to protect Paris failed repeatedly because the Vikings simply sailed past them or found alternate routes. It was not until the early 10th century when the Frankish king offered Viking leader Rollo a territory of his own in exchange for defending the coast against other Norse raiders that the raids on Francia finally slowed. That territory became Normandy, named after the Northmen who settled it. The irony is thick. The best defense against the Vikings turned out to be other Vikings. The longship was not just a boat. It was a complete weapons system, an intelligence platform, and a logistics network, all built into a single vessel. Its clinker construction made it light, fast, and flexible. Its shallow draft gave it access to rivers and coastlines that no other ship could reach. Its symmetrical design allowed instant reversals and escapes. Its dual propulsion system eliminated weather as a limiting factor, and its lightweight frame allowed overland portage between waterways, connecting the entire continent through routes nobody else had mapped. For nearly 300 years, from the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 to the Norman conquest in 1066, the Viking longship was the most dominant military technology in Europe. Entire kingdoms rose and fell based on whether or not they could figure out a defense against it, and most of them could not. The monks at Lindisfarne never saw those ships coming. Neither did the defenders of Paris, or the garrisons along the Rhine, or the settlements deep in the Russian interior. The longship appeared from nowhere, struck fast, and vanished before anyone could respond. And the engineering that made all of that possible, the clinker hull, the flexible keel, the shallow draft, the overlapping planks only centimeters thick, that engineering was perfected by shipwrights who never wrote down a single blueprint. Every longship was built from memory, from tradition, from skills passed from master to apprentice across generations. And somehow, those unwritten plans produced the most effective naval vessel the world had ever seen. If you enjoyed this one and want to see more deep dives into the engineering and tactics that shaped history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Drop a like if this video taught you something new, and leave a comment telling us which ancient technology you want us to break down next. We read every single one, and your suggestions directly shape what we cover. We will see you in the next one.